David kindly agreed when Agrawal had to cancel his participation, and we are very happy to have you here. So please, David.
Of course, yeah, a pale substitute for Arun in many ways. And I'm both going to be talking about Mexico, and I also inherited Arun's title, so I did feel the obligation to say something about global development goals. And it turns out there's actually not, I'll get to that, not a lot to say, unfortunately, the relationship between those two things. But what I want to do first, economists have this joke, it's an insider's joke among economists that, you know, if a particular economic thing is, it's working in practice, but the important thing is, does it work in theory? And so I think it's worth backing up for a minute and think we have seen from Jenny's presentation that, and lots of other data, that community forestry works in practice, but does it work in theory? And I'm going to be sharing with you now some of my, I meant to bring the book so I could wave it, some work by my favorite economists, Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gentis. And as long as I'm here in Sweden, let me just say I think they would be great candidates for the Nobel Prize in economics. Put in my plug. But there's a lot of evidence, as you can see there, from their work and the work of others, and of course of Elinor Ostrom, who I will also be mentioning, who did in fact in 2009 win the Nobel Prize in economics for her work on this very subject. And from Bowles and Gentis, I think we can take community forestry as an example of of evolutionary success, and we're seeing its evolutionary success severely constrained by a lot of government policies, but where government policy has allowed it the space to develop, that it is having cultural evolutionary success and historical evolutionary success, and as such, Bowles and Gentis would call it a distinct group-level institution. And a lot of this work comes out of games and game theory, most of it played with US and European college students. But what has come out of there are some just basic aspects of human behavior that flourish and express themselves in certain settings. And this is just a sample of some of these behavioral characteristics that economists and others have found: that strong reciprocity is common, altruistic punishment sustains cooperation, social preferences are not irrational, people punish those who hurt others, culture and institutions matter, and that this behavior is conditioned strongly by group membership. We evolved to cooperate with other people in our group. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is hostility towards the out-group, which, as we know, is a serious problem in human evolution, something that we hope can be controlled by states, but is not always. But for our purposes, this is the theoretical background why people in a community would collaborate. And as they begin to play more and more of these games in indigenous communities, they have found that indigenous communities, India, Latin America, elsewhere, indeed display much greater predispositions to cooperate than US college students, for example, who also show a predisposition to cooperate when it's indicated. And a lot of this, the work by Ostrom and others, is based on users groups because they were trying to play off of the rational, economic, individualist framework of Western economics and show that it was rational for individuals to come together to cooperate. But in most LDC settings, what you find is not user groups, individuals who come together because they find it rational to cooperate. You find existing communities. And so in existing communities, the predisposition to cooperate and to engage in collective action is very high. And a couple of quotes from Bowles and Gentis, that they have a structure of social interaction characterized by high entry and exit cost, anonymous relationships among members, high degrees of trust, or you know who in the community you can't trust because you know everybody in the community. And in a human community, there's going to be people you don't want to trust with important community matters. So there's this predisposition to cooperate that lowers the cost of collective action. And I would also argue, and this is based on the Mexican case, this is something I've been working on to work on the theory of this, is that when you give a community predisposed to collective action and to cooperate the incentive of a valuable forest resource, what you find is that makes communities stronger. That incentive, we're enable, and a lot of Ostrom's work could also suggest that in a forest, which is frequently a big thing and difficult to manage, if you divide it up individually, that there's benefits there. It's much easier to do if it's being managed by a community, but if that community has a strong economic incentive as well, it's a powerful spur to collective action. And I would argue we'd see that in the Mexican case, where community consolidation coherence has become much stronger. And the problem with community forestry today in most of the world is that it gives limited rights to limited resources, and so you get somewhat limited results in terms of poverty alleviation and some of the other things which are of interest to us. So I was asked to mention the UN Millennium Development Goals and these emerging sustainable development goals. So I will confess I hadn't looked at them for a while, but when I did, what came out at me is that the RRI-WRI report that Jenny just referenced notes that neither the recent fifth assessment report of the IPCC or USAID's global climate policy document recognize the central role of rights over forest in fighting climate change or more broadly in development. And indeed, when you look at the Millennium Development Goals, which are ending now in 2015, they didn't much either. They're really only referenced in the environmental sustainability section as about forest or a safety net for the poor. Okay, yeah, that's what they have to be because communities are given such limited rights to them. I would suggest from the Mexican case that forest can also be a motor for economic development, not just a safety net. But again, the Millennium Development Goals don't mention any particular strategy. They don't mention community forestry. And the Sustainable Development Goals, which are ongoing process and under development, are still in sort of vague things like promoting integrated and sustainable management of natural resources. But again, in what I've seen so far, no specific references to the strategy of community forestry. So there's a lot more that could be done there. And this is a different table from the RRI report. This is just part of the one. It was too big to put all of it up on Latin America. But what I wanted to highlight here is the Mexican case, which is, if you see, has more of the legal rights recognized than any of the other Latin American or any other communities in the world. There is strong government action. It's not perfect. Many of my Mexican colleagues, if they got up here, would just be talking about all the problems. But in a comparative basis worldwide, there's very significant success in that goes back to the Mexican Revolution, and I'll get to that. But this just shows that Mexico is an outlier case internationally, and that it does show that forests are not just a safety net, that they can be motors for economic development. There hasn't been the work that we need to do on sort of household level poverty alleviation, although it's clear to us who work in Mexico that in many cases it has significantly alleviated poverty. And in Mexico, what has happened with rights that came out of the Mexican Revolution, that it has been the management of forests for the commercial production of timber. And timber is the most valuable forest product. There's been a lot of work, and most community forests in the world, the communities have given rights to non-timber forest products, which are just only a safety net. They're usually very low value, important, but are not going to lift people out of poverty. Timber can do that as the most valuable forest product. And there's lots of examples where there's significant accumulation of assets through for-benefit flows, capital investments in the community forest enterprise at CFE, capital investments in community infrastructure like potable water, computers for schools, direct employment in the community forest industry, and direct profit sharing. And we don't have good numbers on this, but there's around certainly in the tens, 30, 40, 50 Mexican community forest enterprises who are at the top, who have accumulated large assets, millions of dollars in assets, internationally competitive businesses, all on the basis of, this just goes into a little bit of the history and the current status. Just looking at that second line there, a lot of history here I don't have time to go into, but it comes out of the Mexican Revolution in the second decade of the 20th century, a successful agrarian revolution that turned property and forest, later a constitutional reform in 1992, which made communities full owners of the forest. And as a result of this, 1/3 of the territory of Mexico is directly managed as a common pool resource, and 60% of the forest of Mexico are in the hands of communities. It's only topped by Papua New Guinea in the world. Formal community governance has also been very important here. There is there's two different forms of agrarian communities in Mexico, ejidos and comunidades. I won't go into the details, but they're very similar. But it's a sort of universal template for community governance, which came out of the Mexican Revolution, which immediately gave communities in Mexico also links with higher levels of government, which was also important because even in countries that Jenny noted, like Brazil and Bolivia, where there has been very significant reforms, there's still very big problems with local community governance and linking it to higher levels, which was done in the Mexican case. Really, what I wanted to call your attention to here is this sign. There's other complicated issues here I won't actually go into, but this is the sign is from a community in the Sierra Juarez in the state of Oaxaca. And for those of you who don't read Spanish, it says, "In this community, private property does not exist. Prohibited the buying and selling of communal lands." Attentively, the mayor of Common Property Goods of Ixtlan de Juarez, Oaxaca, Mexico. And so as the sign says, and I think this certainly does the Swedes one better in terms of socialism. They've gone all the way to full common property here, and this common property, which was given by the Mexican Revolution, has again, I can't go into the details, but has only become stronger through this process of collective action around a community forest. And because Mexico is the outlier that shows that devolution of rights along with government support, and there's a long history here. I mean, this took decades to develop, although some of it also happened over more compressed periods of time, that some of these large sampled studies on community forests, like by Arun Agrawal and also my colleague Ashwini Chatre, what they come up with, since most of the world sample is on these cases where communities have given limited rights to small forest. So they say that higher probability of regeneration, that forest should be small to medium, low levels of subsistence dependence, low commercial value, probability of degradation increases with the commercial value of forest. The case has been opposite in Mexico, as the commercial value of forest have gone up, communities engage in collective action to successfully manage those forests to generate income for their communities and to maintain forest cover, maintain biodiversity. We've got a lot of data on that. And so there's multi-level collective action around forests have contributed to a governance dynamic that shapes strong rules over forest use, crucial for positive forest outcomes. And this is just some more theoretical stuff from Ostrom and others. I mean, even Ostrom, because of the historical focus on traditional common properties, doesn't see markets as a positive force in common property management. Mexico shows that markets can be a positive force. And so we suggested that there are a third way of economic development beyond just public and private. And this is closing from my admired economist Bowles and Gintis. Far from being vestigial anachronisms, we think communities become more rather than less important in the nexus of governance structures in the years to come, since governments may claim some success in addressing governance problems not amenable to market or state solutions. Sorry, this is in fact the last slide. That the limits of the Mexican models and a challenge to community forestry is that inequality makes this community collective action different. Mexican communities, with exceptions, tend to be rather homogeneous, not strong economic differences. And in South Asia, with the caste system, and there's some data on this, which is on the slide, and I'll be happy to share this with you, and I assume it'll be online, that suggests that, yes, it's very difficult in South Asia. So thanks very much.